You're walking through the streets of Rome in golden chains, and every person who sees you understands exactly what those chains mean. You're Zenobia, Queen of Palmyra, and 3 years ago you controlled an empire that stretched from Egypt to Anatolia. Now you're a spectacle in someone else's triumph, and the weight around your wrists isn't just metal, it's the calculated destruction of everything you built. The chains are real gold. This detail matters. Aurelian didn't bind you in iron like a common prisoner. Gold chains announced that you were important enough to defeat, valuable enough to display, royal enough that your humiliation carries meaning. The Roman crowd sees those chains and understands the message. Even queens submit to Rome. Even empires fall. Even power this absolute can be stripped away and paraded through foreign streets while strangers cheer. Your feet are bleeding. They've walked you for miles through the city, and the golden chains are heavy enough that you have to concentrate on each step to avoid stumbling. Stumbling would be worse than pain. Stumbling would confirm what Rome wants everyone to believe, that you're broken, that your strength was always illusion, that your reign was always destined to end like this. So you don't stumble, you keep your head up. You look at the crowd looking at you, and you understand that this performance has been choreographed specifically to destroy not just your body but the idea of you. Here's what happened before the chains. You ruled Palmyra after your husband Odenathus was assassinated. You were regent for your young son, but everyone understood who actually held power. You expanded the Palmyran Empire into Egypt, cutting off Rome's grain supply. You took Anatolia. You controlled the eastern trade routes that made Rome wealthy. You minted coins with your face on them, styled yourself Augusta, and governed an empire that rivaled Rome itself. You weren't a client queen playing at power. You were an emperor in everything but name, and Rome couldn't allow that to continue. Aurelian's campaign against you was methodical. He didn't just defeat your armies, he dismantled your legitimacy piece by piece. First, he took back the territories you'd claimed. Then he besieged Palmyra itself. You tried to escape to Persia to raise a new army, but you were captured before you reached the border. That moment, the moment of capture, that's when your transformation from emperor to prisoner began. Not at the trial, not during the triumph. At the moment when your freedom of movement ended and someone else started deciding where you would go and what would happen to you. The trial was theater. You stood before Aurelian while he presented evidence of your rebellion. Rebellion. The word itself was a weapon, not conquest, not expansion, not legitimate rule. Rebellion. The crime of a subordinate who forgot her place. You defended yourself, there are records of this, by arguing that you were advised by counselors who misled you, that you acted to protect Roman interests in the East, that your actions were never intended as defiance of Roman authority. You said what you had to say to survive. Whether you believed it doesn't matter. Survival required performance and you performed. Aurelian spared your life. This is presented in Roman histories as mercy, clemency. The magnanimous victor showing restraint. But spare your life for what? For this. For the triumph. For the golden chains. For the spectacle of your defeat paraded through Roman streets so that every person in the empire could see what happens to those who challenge Roman power. Your survival wasn't mercy, it was strategy. Dead you'd be a martyr, alive and defeated you're a lesson. The triumph lasts for hours. You're not the only captive being displayed, but you're the centerpiece. There are other prisoners, other trophies, other symbols of Aurelian's victories, but the crowd focuses on you. A woman who ruled an empire, now in chains. A queen who commanded armies, now walking behind a conqueror's chariot. The symbolism is intentional and brutal. Rome doesn't just defeat its enemies, it inverts them. Power becomes powerlessness. Authority becomes subjugation. The higher you stood, the further you fall, and the fall itself becomes entertainment. Your children are somewhere in this procession. Your sons. You can't see them from where you're walking, but you know they're here, part of the display. They're bargaining chips now, leveraged to ensure your continued cooperation. As long as they're alive, you'll do what you're told. As long as they're vulnerable, you'll perform the role assigned to you. This is how power works after defeat, through the people you can't protect anymore, through the knowledge that resistance means they're suffering. The crowd's reaction tells you everything about how this story will be remembered. They cheer, they point, some throw insults, some throw flowers, not at you, at Aurelian celebrating his victory, your context in someone else's narrative. Your empire, your achievements, your decades of rule, all of it reduced to a plot point in Aurelian's story. This is the true cost of royal defeat, not death, erasure. Your version of events stops mattering. You become whatever the victor needs you to be. After the triumph, you're given a villa. House arrest dressed up as retirement. You're alive, which means you're still useful as proof of Roman clemency. You're comfortable, which means you can't complain about cruelty. You're visible enough that other potential rebels can see you and understand the deal. Defy Rome and survive, but survival looks like this. Survival looks like watching your empire dismantled. Survival looks like your children raised as Romans, taught to think of your reign as a mistake. Survival looks like spending decades as a living monument to someone else's victory. The golden chains were just for the triumph. After that, you don't need chains. Where would you go? How would you get there? Who would risk harboring you? You're the most famous defeated queen in the empire. Everyone knows your face. Everyone knows your story. Everyone knows that helping you means defying Rome, and everyone has seen what Rome does to those who defy it. The chains were symbolic, but the cage is real. It's made of visibility, of dependence, of the knowledge that your children's safety depends on your continued compliance. Here's what the historical sources won't tell you about those years in the villa. The daily erosion of self. The slow adjustment to powerlessness. The way you stop making plans because plans require agency and you have none. The way you stop thinking of yourself as a ruler because that identity has been systematically dismantled. The way you learn to be grateful for small mercies. Good food, decent shelter, the absence of overt cruelty. Because the alternative is constantly raging against conditions you can't change. You teach your children languages, history, mathematics. You maintain the routines of education because routine is the only thing you control. But you know they're learning other lessons too. They're learning that power is temporary. They're learning that loyalty to Rome is survival. They're learning that their mother's empire was a mistake. You watch them internalize these lessons, and you can't correct them without risking everything. So you teach them grammar and geography, and you don't talk about what you used to rule. The villa becomes smaller over the years. Not physically, the walls stay where they are, but your world contracts. You stop thinking about Palmyra. You stop thinking about Egypt. You stop thinking about the territories you controlled and the armies you commanded. Those memories hurt too much, and hurting serves no purpose. You focus on what's immediate, the garden, the weather. The books you're allowed to read. You become smaller to fit the space allowed to you. Some histories say you died in the villa. Some say you remarried, became the wife of a Roman senator, lived quietly until old age. The uncertainty tells you everything about what happened to your story. You became unimportant enough that historians stopped tracking you carefully. Your death merited less documentation than your triumph. You faded from a main character to a footnote, and then from a footnote to a maybe, a possibly, a sources differ. But before that fading, before the quiet years in the villa, there was the walk through Rome in golden chains. And that walk mattered because everyone saw it. Provincial governors who might have considered independence, client kings who might have tested Rome's patience, ambitious generals who might have thought about carving out their own territories. They all heard about Zenobia in golden chains, and they adjusted their calculations accordingly. This is how empires maintain control, not through constant warfare. Warfare is expensive, through spectacle. Through the visible, memorable demonstration of what happens when you challenge power. The golden chains weren't punishment. They were communication. They said, this is the best possible outcome for defying Rome. This is what happens when Rome is merciful. Imagine what happens when Rome is not. The chains were melted down eventually. Gold is valuable and Rome was practical. Maybe they became coins. Maybe they became jewelry for some senator's wife. Maybe they became part of another triumph for another conquered queen. The gold moved through the economy, its origins forgotten, while you sat in a villa and watched your empire become a memory, become a story, become a cautionary tale. Your advisors died. The counselors you blamed during your trial, some were executed, some imprisoned, some exiled. Their suffering bought your survival, and you had to live with that calculation. You had to wake up every morning knowing that other people died while you lived, and that you facilitated that exchange by blaming them at trial. This is what defeat does. It forces you to participate in your own destruction, to cooperate in the dismantling of everything you built, to betray the people who served you, because the alternative is mutual destruction. The cost of royal defeat isn't measured in chains or villas or years of house arrest. It's measured in the person you have to become to survive it. You were an emperor. You commanded armies, governed territories, made decisions that shaped history. And then you were a prisoner who said what you needed to say to survive. And then you were a trophy paraded through foreign streets. And then you were a cautionary tale living quietly in comfortable captivity. And then you were a woman whose death wasn't important enough to record precisely. The gold chains marked the beginning of that transformation, but the transformation itself took years, and it was more thorough than any physical restraint. Rome didn't need to kill you. They needed to demonstrate that even the most powerful, most successful, most legitimate challenge to Roman authority could be reduced to this. Comfortable captivity, historical footnote, living proof that resistance fails. Your survival served Rome's interests better than your death ever could. Every year you lived in that villa, you proved that Rome could afford mercy because Rome's victory was so complete that even its defeated enemies became tools of imperial propaganda. The golden chains are in the history books now. They're the detail that makes your story memorable, the visual that captures imagination. Queens in chains, empire defeated, power inverted. The image does exactly what it was designed to do. It makes your defeat spectacular and your suffering symbolic. It transforms your lived experience of humiliation, loss, and gradual erasure into a story about Roman glory. But you weren't a symbol. You were a person who built something remarkable and watched it get systematically destroyed. You were a ruler who made calculated decisions about expansion and governance, and then had to defend those decisions before a hostile audience as crimes. You were a mother who couldn't protect her children. You were a queen who became a prisoner who became a comfortable irrelevance. The chains were just the beginning. The real cost was everything that came after, the decades of slow erasure. The adjustment to powerlessness. The loss not just of empire but of the right to your own story. And here's what makes it worse: you probably understood exactly what was happening. You weren't naive, you'd ruled an empire. You understood power and spectacle and propaganda. You knew why Aurelian chose golden chains instead of iron. You knew why he spared your life. You knew what role you were being forced to play. And you played it anyway because the alternative was death or worse, suffering for your children. You participated in your own symbolic destruction because you were smart enough to understand that participation was survival. This is the machinery of imperial power, not crude violence that's expensive and creates martyrs, sophisticated humiliation that forces the defeated to cooperate in their own degradation. Golden chains instead of execution. Comfortable captivity instead of torture. A slow, public transformation from emperor to prisoner to footnote that everyone can witness and learn from. Your suffering became pedagogy. Your defeat became policy. Your chains became a tool for controlling people who would never meet you, who would only hear the story and adjust their behavior accordingly. If you're thinking about power, about empire, about what it costs to challenge authority and lose, think about this. Think about the walk through Rome. Think about the weight of golden chains. Think about the years in the villa. Think about the slow fade from history. Think about what it means to survive your own defeat and live long enough to watch your empire become a story that people tell to explain why challenging power fails. That's the true cost of royal defeat. Not death, not even suffering, the transformation into a lesson for others, the loss of your story. The golden chains that everyone remembers while everything else about you slowly disappears. So what other uncomfortable historical truth should we investigate next? What other story needs to be told with the weight it deserves instead of the comfortable distance history usually provides? Drop your suggestions in the comments below. And if this investigation into the real human cost of ancient power struggles changed how you think about historical defeat, hit that subscribe button on Mythbusting. We're going to keep uncovering the truths that traditional history polishes into mythology.